Prelude. Between youth and maturity comes a time of questing and discovery. Between apprenticeship and mastery comes journeying. Of the strange apprentice years of the mage-smith Elof, their great and terrible achievements, and their uncanny ending, the Winter Chronicles tell in the Book of the Sword. But when that storm was past, and months of sickness drew to an end, the desire of his heart awoke in Elof once more, and he was free to heed it. And it is of that desire, and the long quest it led him, even along the byways of the years, that is told in the Book of the Helm. Chapter 1. The Kindling. It was the sea wind woke him, as his head drooped lower over the close-scrawled book. Through the open upper door of the smithy it gusted, flattening the hearth fire, guttering the rush lamps, and it breathed a sudden chill upon his bare neck. He sat up sharply, blinking in the wavering lamplight, with the queasy alertness of the suddenly awakened. He had been elsewhere, somewhere far away, black marshes or bleak mountains, chasing a shadow out of his past, a shadow that vanished before him, shifted shape in his grasp, reformed and reappeared at his back, forever close, forever out of reach. There came the soft thud of a book closing, and impatiently he shook off the moment of the nightmare. "How goes the night?" he asked, without turning his head.
"At its accustomed pace,"
came Rock's calm reply.
"An hour before the middle hour it is reached by my glass. Time you were abed, by Ill's iron command. Marja and old Joran are off long since, and tomorrow is my Lord Kermorvan's day. Sleep, if you would be fresh for that."
"I cannot sleep."
"A grand mimic you were then, but a minute gone."
"I mean, I dare not. Not now, with my mind so weighed down by thoughts and cares. My very dreams are poisoned."
"You found naught to help you, then?"
Elof shook his head. "No, nothing. And you?" Rock rose, stumped over to a bench heaped with great tomes, and slapped down the one he had been reading upon the highest pile.
"The same. Much fascinating, much I do not understand, but nothing bearing upon your concern."
He peered at the boxes of scrolls beside Elof's table, and leaned over his shoulder.
"Not so many of those left, either. What's that one all about? Doesn't look promising. Pity our late unlamented master didn't bring more of his precious library south with him. It'll all be mouldering away in the old tower now."
"If the Duergar have not seized the place," said Elof. "Or others."
"The ice, you mean,"
said Rock softly, and glanced involuntarily out into the dark beyond the stable door.
"Doubt the books have much to tell it."
"Aye, but there are other things there. We did not find that helm I made, the Tarn helm, among the Mastersmith's effects, and that too was a work of power." Rock shrugged.
"It had its uses for passing unseen, and somehow shifting place, if what you saw the night of its making was right."
"It was," answered Elof heavily, "and on the ice also. Here's a scroll Ingar must have consulted in planning the helm. See, it bears the very chalk marks from his soiled sleeves." He stopped a moment, caught his breath. Rock said nothing. "This is a treatise on the power of masks, with annotations by the mastersmith of much he learned among the Equesh, of transforming the wearer into his own living symbol. If I understand aright, Such transformation must be the root of the helm's whole power. You remember the virtues he had me set upon it? Of concealment, of change, of moving subtly and unseen? It was that which haunted my dream. The understanding at last how the helm must act, how powerful it truly is. The helm is a mask, a perfect mask, a concealment shaped by its wearer's own image of himself. Let him think of shadow, and he is unseen. Let him think of a shape, and it masks his own. Let him think of being somewhere else, and he is masked in that thought. He is there. Rock swallowed.
A fell power to wear with a light heart. I think of many places I would as soon never be. But the Duergar'll know what to do with it, if any can.
I do not think they have it. Rock eyed him sharply.
Your reason by your tone. What then?
Elof sighed deeply. You saw as I did that last hour. 2 swans flew up, flew eastward.
You made but one helm.
Kara wore a cloak when first I met her, ere the helm was made, and its lining was black swan's down. But Louhi wore no such cloak. And why would they ride horses over such rough country, and when visiting an ally, if both could shift their shape and fly? It may well be, that Louhi came that night to command the mastersmith to make her something that matched Kara's power. He stood up, and the precious parchment crumpled in the convolution of his powerful fingers. The rod of thick wood at its center creaked and snapped. He looked at it in annoyance, and cast it down upon the table, twisted as the ruined black blade before him. You see now why I must follow her so urgently? Whatever she truly is? Once more a great power of my making is put into evil hands. Once more must I find it, and if need be, destroy it. And she is my only link to Louhi. Even if I did not wish to free Kara, still I would have to follow her, find her, even if I did not love her. Rock pursed his lips and looked away, as he might from the sudden blaze of his forge fire. Gently he ran a finger along the tortured metal before him.
Well, for such a task you'll need your strange sword made whole, right enough. Few in the world could have cloven as that one did in your last need.
He stretched and yawned loudly.
But for now, do you try to rest at least. Tired eyes may miss what's plain by daylight.
Elof breathed out a long breath and nodded. True enough. Very well. I'll try, but not this moment. I'll sit up a while and mend the hilt, at least, if there's no more to be done now. Work of the hands will clear the brain. When Rock had gone, Elof smoothed out the crumpled scroll and stowed it carefully. Then he sighed and turned to the hilt. The sheer force of the blow that had twisted the sword had shivered loose the plain silvered wires of the grip. Gone was their cloudy, stormy sheen, racing and beautiful as the marshland skies beneath which they were made. He thought a moment, reached for his precious tool pack, and bore it to a workbench by the window. There, Marja, old Joran's girl journeyman, kept her work. Instead of the blackened instruments of the forge, delicate grippers, thin files, and fine-tipped burins were laid out in neat racks, for Marja was an accomplished jeweler. Elof chose a delicate blade, and from a side pouch he drew a fold of stiff leather. A few dry leaf needles fell from one end, and he opened it with minute care. Within it lay a dry sprig of the redwood tree, almost naked of its needles save for one small twig, and this he carefully severed. He laid it upon a polished stone slab, brushed across it a subtle paste of egg white and gums thinned with strongest spirits, and laid across it a light leaf of hammered silver, finer than finest parchment. He breathed gently on this, till a ghostly outline of the twig showed through, and then with fine-tipped tools he began to smooth it down, patiently working it close around the outline of every needle, turning it over and adding more leaf till the twig was wholly encased, enshrined. Now it looked like the talisman it had been. Little power seemed left to it, but it was too precious a thing to discard entirely. Well, there are leaves on it, even withered and dead. Something of the virtue of forests will cling to it. He smiled. But no autumn wind shall unfix these last leaves. A silver season sets them in place, and I will bear them with me wherever I go. These words he spoke over his work, and then unwinding the wires, he fastened the twig about the grip, and set the wires tightly in place above it once more. It felt as solid as before, but Elof scowled as he took it in his hand. What was it without the blade it bore? He tossed it down in disgust. The night was silent now, save for the rising whine of the wind, bearing with it the distant sound of the wavelets in the harbor, the clopping hooves of some benighted rider on the cobbled streets. Sleep seemed further fled than ever from his mind, so sharply the need to learn spurred him. Impatiently, he snatched up another scroll. It proved to be a wordy treatise on extracting metals from ores, and, save for a long chapter on the strange forces set moving by iron and copper and corrosives, it was dull stuff. And before him, on the table, sat the sword, the precious blade he had not made for himself, but had taken from a long dead hand. It lay there like a mute accusation. Was he worthy to wield such a thing, if he, a smith of craft and power, could not reforge it? But how? How? He pushed the scroll aside and took up the cool metal in his hands, if metal it was in truth, for no furnace could heat it, no file bite upon it, no hammer subdue its stubborn strength. Not all his smithcraft, all his long study, all his strength of mind or arm, neither the flames of his forge, nor the fires of his need could make that blade anew.
Greetings, worthy smith.
A sound of thunder rang through the smithy, rattling the heavy door on its hinges. Still greater was the impact of the voice. The blade flew from Elof's fingers. The bench he sat on overturned as he sprang to his feet in fury and fright. But the latch was up, the lower door already swinging open, and Elof's anger slackened as he saw what manner of figure stood there, half hesitant in the shadows of the street. The man was old, that was obvious. In the dim light from the forge, his wide hat shadowed his face, its battered brim drooping across one eye, but it only served to stress the whiteness of the wind-blown locks and beard beneath. So also the heavy mantle, that had once been dark blue and was now sorely stained with travel. The shoulders beneath it were bowed, and he leaned upon a great staff of smooth, dark wood, crowned with its own bark. A strong support, but hard, perhaps, to manage. Elof forgave him his clumsy knock.
Greetings,
said the old man once again, and bowed courteously.
A wayworn guest asks hospitality of your hearth awhile, that shone out warmly from afar in these night-bound streets.
The voice was gruff, yet deep and resonant, with more than a trace of the northern burr. Elof smiled at his old-fashioned courtesy, but still he hesitated. Who is it that asks? Who has sought out my smithy in all this great town? The old man stepped slowly through the door, as if that had been invitation enough. The sea breeze frisked in with him, whipping up the forge charcoals, pulling puffs of smoke from beneath the chimney breast.
A wanderer only, so the world might call me. For indeed far and wide I have wandered, many long leagues across its face, and further still it seems I must go.
I doubt as far as I, thought Elof wryly, but said no such word, and moved to usher the ancient gently out. A beggar once within is harder to turn out, and the city was full of northern beggars now, young and old, who had slipped past the gate guards. He could not feed them all. Also, of this oldster's face, he could see only a great hooked beak of a nose with a bright dark eye above it, and in that a gleam he did not altogether trust. Elof laughed and fumbled at his belt for a coin, enough for a night's lodging. Well, if you're called a wanderer, the last I would be to detain you. Here's alms, but I cannot. The old beggar paid him no heed, but advanced into the smithy with that same slow stride, his mantle sweeping odd swirls in the dust. Elof stopped, startled, and let the coin slide back into his pouch. He must once have stood very tall, this ancient. Even now his head was on a level with Elof's, and the pale, mottled hands that gripped the great staff were long and muscular. In the trembling fire glow his shadow loomed enormous against the smithy wall.
Good journey greets the journeyer gladly, aye. So it is said in the Northlands, was it not? For I hear them in your fair speech.
Elof blinked at the mild rebuke, but sought to bar his way none the less. The old man ignored him, and turned towards the hearth.
So it ever was with me in the old days. Men made me welcome then, gave me food and drink and even gifts. True men, they say. They not scared to admit a stranger. Trouble fears that trouble wills. Thus they said, and opened their doors wide.
Troubles I have, sighed Elof, resenting the nettle's sting. Why do you come to worsen them?
I would only sit by your hearth,
grunted the old man, lowering himself slowly and wearily onto the brick seat, sighing as he laid his back against it and basked in the warmth.
So, since it is grudged me, this scant rest, I must fee you for it as best I can, with wisdom. Much I have seen, learned many things strange, even to men of lore. Counsel of mine has lifted gnawing care from many men's hearts. Ask of me what you will.
Elof sighed. Nothing is grudged, he said firmly, but I have many labors. Take the alms I offered, and leave me to them. I need no counsel that you could give. The old man tossed his head contemptuously, and Elof caught a glimpse of his face, lined but hard like some ancient tree.
Are you so sure of that?
Demanded the stranger sternly.
Many who deem themselves wise fail only to know the extent of their ignorance.
He poked his staff clumsily at a pile of bound books.
You bury your nose in dead words. You seek some secret, that is plain. Words hold many, that is true, but not all.
Again that dark eye flashed from beneath the ruined brim, quizzical, mocking, and lit upon the crippled sword.
Ah, you seek a means to mend that blade.
He chuckled.
A fine strong lad like yourself. Can you not simply hammer it straight? No? Then however did you make it in the first place?
Again, the dart flew straight and keen. Elof felt his ears burn, his cheeks flare, and cursed beneath his breath.
You do not know,
mused the old man, cocking his great head to one side.
You cannot have shaped the blade for yourself, then. It is not yours.
Elof glared at him. It is no man's else. I found it, where it had lain buried beyond sight or memory. The old man shook his head querulously, his shabby hat flapping.
So, found is not freely given. Yet sometimes even a gift must be earned, must it not? A horse that one must learn to saddle before riding, a boat to rig before sailing. It is not for me to say, but such gifts might be given to teach the given new craft, or make him aware of that he already has. Thus truly he wins both the gift and the skill for himself, and stands free of all obligation, save gratitude.
Elof stood very still. The forge fire was crackling now, whipped up by a breeze sharp as a storm's outrider. He looked askance at the old man, hard to make out against the smoky glare behind him. Skill I have sought.
Aye, in books of another's wisdom. They have their place, perchance. But I had always heard that mage-smiths of the north were such men as ever sought new truths, new wisdoms in the very ebb and flow of nature itself.
Aye, said Elof fiercely, stung now to the quick. So we do. The master-smiths, the great among us, they harness with their craft the many forces of this world. To heights and depths they put forth their hands, and grasp them, bind them in cunning work. The true master-smith fears not to snatch those forces, even from the hands of the very powers that wield them. The old man laughed softly to himself. Then, with a speed that startled Elof, he hauled himself up one-handed upon his great staff, and with the other clawed up the black blade from the table, heedless of its hair-fine edge. Outraged, Elof sprang to seize it, only to stop short with a gasp as the great staff, twirled effortlessly about, tapped against his breastbone. The hand he raised to dash it aside faltered at the slight, cold sting where it touched him. His fingers closed more gently round the bark, found it a mere wrapping over a shape beneath, and chill meltwater coursed in his veins. It was an edge he touched, narrow, hard, and tapering. This staff at his breast, hard on a strange wound's scarless site, was a tall spear, and in hands deft to wield it. The old man nodded softly.
Proudly spoken, my wise smith, to set your kind against the steerers of the world. Yet, know you of what you speak?
He straightened suddenly, effortlessly, and the black shadows seemed to flutter round the forge, chill-winged on the freshening air.
Over this world was set their dominion ere it was shaped. Over sea and land they rule, over sky, over stone, cloud and mountain, forest and lake, plain and river, over all that lives, plants, beasts, men, and over the ice.
The great staff that was no staff stretched out in a wide sweep before him, as if to score some mighty secret on the flagstones, as if to encompass the wide world. On the outflung arms the mantle billowed as if in the winds of the heights, and flew like a banner from the shaft.
High and wise they are, and surpassing strong, the least and weakest past measure of men. In their slightest glance is seeing, their least thought knowing, their smallest gesture power.
Outheld like some vast scepter, the staff's head glanced slightly against the flaring forge coils. The smithy rang with a shattering sound, a blast of thunder that flattened flames and spat sparks stinging and sizzling into the smoky air. The floor shook, flagstones heaved, and a great blade of glaring light leaped between hearth and chimney. A thunderbolt burst beneath the roof. Wind shrieked, smoke rolled in blasted tatters across the room. The lamp, blown out, topped and shattered. The tools ranked upon the wall jangled and chimed. But amid this stood the old man, stern, unmoved, cold as a winter sky, his dark eye glittering in the shadow of his hat. There was silence then, the strangely unquiet silence, still reverberant, that comes after cataclysmic sound. And in it, distant, faint but very clear, Elof heard what might be an answer, a faint, crackling rumble borne from far off down the shrilling sea breeze. The gusting air, sobbing and rattling at the door, pressed chill against his stiffened spine, and he began to shiver violently.
"Well, cunning smith,"
demanded the old man quietly,
"do you repent now of your pride?"
Mutely, holding his eyes on the old man with utmost intensity, Elof shook his head. But the strange wanderer only leaned wearily on the great staff once again. Shrouded still stood its crown, but in the rippling shadow of the firelight, cast upon the wall the shape of a broad spearhead stood out clear.
"Well enough that you should not, for, as I have heard the wise tell it, it is only those of the ice, those who fail in their trust, who desire slaves, servants, subjects. The true steerers cannot, being themselves doubly servants, to a cause and to an end. And that end is best served by those men who need their help least."
He sighed and turned towards the door.
"I cannot fee you for your hearth gift. You need no counsel of mine. I depart in your debt, as before."
Elof stared. As before? How so? For I never laid eyes on you till now. And counsel I need, for I still don't know how to reforge the sword. The wanderer had reached the open door. There he paused to look back, the picture of way-weary age. Yet his eye gleamed brighter than ever, and what lurked below the tremor in his stern voice seemed nearer mirth than misery.
"You should not mock me. You should not think to mock me. Have you not told me of it, you who aspire to clutch the forces of the world in the palm of your hand? The answer lies open to a child. We're not children wont to fear."
He gestured contemptuously with his empty hand, and his mantle fell away from his arm. Beneath it gleamed blackness as dark waters under the moon, a breastplate and the hilt of a vast black sword. Then, The old man ducked through the door and was gone.
"You!"
yelled Elof. A sudden crazed anger seared away awe and fear, and he ran headlong for the door.
"You again! Raven! Stay, you wanderer! You get up!"
From the blackness, a bird's harsh scream answered him, a wordless essence of mockery, and the swift ring of shod hooves upon cobbles. And he knew that one of those hooves he had shod himself. Out into the street he burst, but it was a veil of blackness. Many great storehouses and tall granaries of the Merchants' Guild stood here, and their shadows blanketed it deep. Only at the far end, by the harbor, he thought he saw for an instant the gleaming flank of that lofty war-horse. But it flickered again, and he saw it was only the herald of the approaching storm. Lightning that leaped from cloud to cloud, glittering against the pale stone. The wind blew hard in his face. The first cold droplet stung him. It was thunder, not hoofbeats, that drummed afar. The wanderer had vanished as he had come. The distant lightning awoke a reflection at his feet. There, glinting on the cobbles, lay the black blade. He snatched it up and stared at it, caught and baffled. What could the old fox have meant? To claim its secret was already his. A third of its length from the tang was so sadly wrung and twisted that the rest stuck out at the crazy angle of a broken limb. Thus indeed it felt to him, and one not yet set or splintered. Splinted. Had it not defied every art he could summon up? Even the secrets he had learned of the Duergar, who could look deep into the very form and structure of metal, had failed him. And if it was not metal, it had to be metal. It felt like metal. It could not be obsidian or any other glass, or any of the strange stones savages and poor men had once used. And yet, as he played it in his fingers, he became less sure. That gleam was undimmed, its edge undulled. Even long years sunk in a marsh had failed to fault them. Could the hardest metal endure thus? But how to test it? With a lodestone? Many metals would not answer one. With corrosives? To succeed would be to damage it. Elof stood there, his head whirling like the storm wind, and fought for calm. One might ignore what an old beggar mumbled, but surely this weird being said nothing without purpose. How might those words apply to him? He did not know what wisdom he lacked. He had the blade as a gift, but a gift that must be earned with new and daring skill. He could not assume that the lore of it was to be found in books, but more likely among the ebb and flow of nature. How? Where? Somehow he had said it himself. In fury, he hammered at his brow as if he might reforge the mind within. The storm crackled as it drew nearer the land. Above the harbor wall, the dark outline of the Tower of Vade stood out stark against the coruscating clouds. It woke intrusive memories in him, of fear and blood and pain, and of love found and lost. He strove to force them down and concentrate his thought. In angry defiance, he had prattled of a maidesmith being able to put forth his hand and grasp. "Rock!" he yelled suddenly, and whirled around. Slipping on the cobbles, he dashed back into the smithy, yelling for his friend and wondering why he had to. That levin bolt should have had the whole household hurtling from their beds. But the corridor was empty, and when he flung wide the door of Rock's chamber, his friend was still a round hummock beneath the bedclothes. It was Marja who bounced up first from beside him, angrily clutching a fur counterpane about herself. She had fled with old Joran, late her master, out of the north when their towns were sacked by Ekwesh marauders. When at last the great tide of fugitives had borne them to the Southlands, they were as near starvation as any. But by good fortune they had fallen in with Rock. Remembering Joran kindly, and knowing the worth of even a minor master-smith of the north, Rock had taken them into his own forge. The partnership had prospered, but to what degree Elof had not guessed. Too impatient, though, to be startled or embarrassed now, he seized Rock by the shoulder. "Wake up! Didn't you hear it?"
"Hear what?"
mumbled Rock. "The crash! The bolt! Rock, it was the raven!" "The raven?" cried Marja, gaping wide-eyed at Elof as if he were mad. Distant lightning whitened the shutters.
"The raven?"
yelped Rock, sitting up and looking wildly about.
"Like you told me? The bastard's back? Where? In here?"
"Yes, here, in the smithy!" Marja cried out and dived beneath the bedclothes in a tangle of brown limbs. "Didn't you hear? It was like thunder. Never mind. Up with you, up, while I rouse Joran. There's work afoot. I can reforge the sword."
"Now hold hard,"
growled Rock angrily, pulling his arm free and putting a protective arm round the heap of bedclothes.
"Amicac's teeth, man. You come barging in. I know you're all agog, but there's nothing that won't wait for honest sunlight."
"But there is!" cried Elof. "Well, it's at hand. Oh, there's no time to explain."
"At least send for Ills, and we'll see what she—"
"No time even for that. I'm sorry, Marja, but we must hurry, or it'll be too late." Rock winced as the cold air struck his bare skin.
"It'd better be good, that's all."
It was a strange parade that scant minutes later made its uneasy way down the street towards the steps of the harbor wall and emerged at last, gasping exhaustion like landed fish, into the rain-sprinkled air atop the open summit of Vade's tower. The guttering link-light Marja held high trailed a splash of gold around the battlements, cast her spidery shadow down across the gallery where the master-smith had lurked among his looted wealth. In her free hand she bore Elof's bundle of tools. Under that arm the ruined blade, well wrapped, and in the pocket of her man's smock the hilt and fresh rivets. As she came out under the sky, she looked back with concern at the three men stumbling and gasping up the stair behind her, under the weight of Rock's strongest and heaviest anvil. By now, old Joran could give no more than token assistance, and even Rock's dour strength ebbed. But Elof drove them on up the steps like a man inspired, taking ever more of the burden upon his own shoulders. Lightning flashed, the thunder hard on its heels, and he chivied his friends furiously up the last few steps.
"If that raven shows his face again," gurgled Rock, "he'll have this slug in it." What I'd gladly know, lads,"
panted Joran, as they struggled out into the summer summit,
"is just how much farther there is to go."
"This is the place," gasped Elof, lifting his head to the spattering rain. "And in time, it seems."
"Here?" demanded Rock. "Why here? There's not even a fireplace."
But they were glad enough to set down the anvil, with a clang that struck sparks from the hard stone. Joran leaned on it, wheezing, while Marja comforted him. Breathless, Elof gazed out over the harbor and the sea beyond. In the lightning's own light, the storm clouds rose up immense, bastion upon bastion, like some great fortress of the powers, seething with the energies it could scarce contain. Now their vanguard was almost overhead, and the rain was growing heavier, sputtering against the lynx cover. A great curtain of it, opaque as a pearl, was sweeping in across the churning sea, no more than moments away. He set his teeth and looked down into the darkness of the stairwell. All the time they had struggled through it, he had been willing some guidance from it, some sign such as he had once felt there. Now there was nothing, save perhaps watchfulness, remote and stern. A flash sent his shadow coursing down the steps. The thunder was so close, he jumped. "This grows perilous," he heard Joran grumble, and Marja's squeak of agreement. "It does indeed," Rock said. He took the bag of tools and unrolled it on the anvil top. "Leave the gear, Marja. Get you back to the stairs. And you, Joran. I'll give him what help he needs." "It's given," said Elof quietly, unwrapping the blade. "Pass me a good hammer, if you please. The great slope-headed one of Duergar pattern. Fit those rivets into the hilt, there, and lay them aside with a punch to fit. Then, go with the others." "You're sure?" growled Rock, rummaging through the clinking roll. "I smell another of your tomfool tricks." "Maybe. But fool or no, none save myself may try. Now, keep back." Flash and thunder all but drowned him out. The few holes at anchor rocked, plunged, and vanished as the rain lashed across their decks. "Get below!" Elof yelled. "There's no more you can do. Later, I may need you." From the pouch at his belt, he tugged the armor gauntlet he had made among the Duergar, and Rock's eyes widened in understanding, doubt, and awe. "Do you make sure later comes, that's all," he bellowed, and vanished smartly into the stairwell. An instant later, the line of rain charged across the tower top, and all vanished in lashing confusion. Elof stood fast by the anvil, fighting to keep his feet against the buffeting wind, struggling to hold the blade while he drew on the long gauntlet. It slid minutely over his fingers, inscribed and patterned plate molding smoothly to the close contours of his flesh, mail fine almost as cloth, swelling and shaping around the very joints, till his arm was enclosed to the shoulder, and his fingers could at last close firm round the flat, faceted jewel at its heart. With that comfort, he dared not pause to think, but sprang up upon the battlements and thrust his arm to the sky. Now he himself was the summit of the sea-wall. There was no higher place save the towers of the distant citadel itself. It must happen. It had to happen any moment now. Then a thought unleashed a rush of cold perspiration. Quickly Lai spread his fingers wide and flat as he could, arching back his hand to raise the palm. If it should light first on a fingertip, anywhere but the palm. The storm took him and shook him. The blast yelled at him not to be a fool. He felt it roll and swirl in the abyss at his back, down along the streets far below. Or was it at his back? He was no longer even sure which way he faced. All his courage was thinning and draining out of him, leached away by the icy rain. He had carried that anvil too long. He had no strength left. His arm was a hot wire of pain, his wrist an agony of tension, his fingers squalling to clamp shut. Another minute, and he must abandon this lunacy, drop down and cower before forces he should never have aspired to defy. Another second even. Then it was as if storm and tower and all else vanished, and an infinite whiteness opened around him, a space that echoed with the single stroke of an incalculable drum. A vast weight descended, and for a moment he held up the whole vault of the sky on his palm, lest it drop to shatter the fragile glass bubble of a world beneath. It was cramp, not will, that snapped his fingers shut. At once the storm was buffeting him again, and he held some vast monster by the leash that throbbed and trembled in his palm. He wavered, lost his footing, and with a yell of madness leaped the only way he could. Hard flagstones slapped at his feet. He stumbled against the anvil, and the black blade clattered down upon it. He was dimly aware of voices that clamored to him, but the throbbing grew within his palm till it seemed the very joints of his fingers must yield. With his right hand he edged the blade round to lie against the metal, and groped blindly for his hammer. The short haft came under his fingers, and he seized it, feeling the comforting weight. Down above the black sword's twisted heart he brought his quivering arm, the clamped fist vertical, closed thumb uppermost. Then, feeling the faint ripple of fine rings clashing, he slowly released his little finger a trifle, as if he would trickle away a fistful of sand. White fire, purer than the shrouded stars, poured down upon the anvil, a sparkling, blasting light that mere eyelids barely barred. 100 high fosses roared there, cataracts louder than the storm. Rock yelled at something, but his voice was lost in the tumult. To the watchers at the stairhead, Elof's sturdy frame stood out against the light in a single sweep of motion, the huge hammer swinging high to the top of its arc, descending with easy, leisurely grace. While the light still shone, the hammer plunged down into its midst, rose and plunged again, and a fountain of smoke spurted up for the storm to sport with. At the fourth blow, or the fifth, the light cut off abruptly, and Elof let the hammer fall. But the gauntlet, still clenched, he raised now on high, and sent his own closed fist hammering down in the hammer's place. A blasting light smote upon the anvil, and leaped upward to the racing clouds. A great, ringing clang shook the tower, and the smith staggered, and sank down to his knees upon the glistening flagstones. Whether it was the final escape of what had been captured, or simply the eye of the storm, a clearness opened overhead. The rain slackened to a fine drizzle, as if the clouds wept for their lost power. The watchers stumbled up from the stairwell, and rushed to the swaying figure before them, fearful of injuries they might find. But though his garments smoldered in many places, and his wet hair smoked, though his face was smudged and scorched, his eyes glittered with a wild exultation. "See!" he shouted, and pointed out with his outthrust gauntlet. "You wise wanderer, say, do I pass the test? And you, from whose hand I took it, do you bear witness? Say now, is it not truly mine? From a dying hand it fell ruined, but by a living one it is made whole. On evil it was marred, yet it shines now straight and strong. To life again it awakens, to strike in its defense. Blind the unhallowed with your dark gleam, shatter the evil, strike down the false." Shaking off the hands of his friends, Elof surged to his feet, seized the hilt from the flagstones, and stumbled forward. In the pale glow of the lancing fires overhead, they looked after him, and saw. Joran cried out. Marja squealed, and Rock swore in a hoarse whisper. Straight indeed stood the black blade, for it was driven deep down into the very metal of the anvil. Elof thrust the hilt down over the upturned tang and twisted the rivets home. Then, without staying to flatten them, he braced a boot against the iron and gave a single convulsive heave. With a scream of stressed metal, a shower of sparks, and a loud, triumphant ring, the blade tore free. The anvil, cracked now from top to foot, fell slowly into two and clanged upon the tower's dark stones, hissing in the reviving rain. So cleaves the smith's own blade. Then Elof laughed weakly and turned to Rock and the others, and embraced them, clumsily, for he would not set down the sword. Thank you, my friends. Thank you. I'm sorry it had to come so fast and without explanation. And Rock, I'll craft you trinkets enough to pay for a fine new anvil. Jorn and Marja stood dazed and speechless, but Rock, more hardened to strange matters, simply shook his head in wonder, and set to gathering up Elof's tools.
That's no matter. Leave this where it lies for now, and let's be off here ere the heavens start some more smithing of their own.
He chivied the others off down the stairs, clapped Elof on the back as he passed, and exclaimed at the soggy thump his hand made.
Do you come back with us, man. You're soaked to the skin. We'll find you a stoop of mulled wine and a warm bed.
Elof shook his head, still exultant. Thank you, but no. I've trespassed enough upon you all for tonight. I'll turn back to Kermorvan's house and my own bed, and leave you in peace.
As you will,
said Rock, putting his arm around Marja.
My respects to his lordship, and we'll be cheering him when he comes out onto the steps tomorrow.
You're not coming to the ceremony?
What? To hear a crew of windbag syndics spouting for hours? Scoffed Rock. I'll leave the formalities to you and Ills. You've the heads for them. Sooner pass the time in the alehouse, if there's any to be had in these days.
Elof chuckled with the others. If there is, I'll be bound you'll find it. Save some for us afterwards. Letting the others press on ahead, he lingered in the musty darkness, finding its cool quietude pleasant after the storm above. The blade in his hand was cool also, and the gauntlet at his belt. Scarcely conceivable, it seemed, that such forces had flowed through them not long since. He thought back to the moment of fire, to the brief glimpse he had gained deep into the matter of the sword. It was indeed no metal. Long black strands had glowed within it, coiled and twisted, set thick in a hard, dark binding substance. Glossy and lustrous they had seemed, like the locks of some long-dead beauty set imperishably, save the blade's edge was finer than the finest hair. He stopped by one of the great stairwell windows, where stormlight yet glimmered, and held up the sword to gaze again. But its surface was once more a mirror impenetrable. A thought struck him, and he looked at the hilt, tilting it in the light. Once more it glimmered with racing cloud patterns, but they seemed gray no longer. They were black, potent as the storm clouds whose living force had flowed into the blade's reforging. I never named you before, he said softly. I cannot have been sure of you, indeed, but now I am, and for the darkness that clings to you, I will name you. the bringer of darkness be, herald of night. Gorthauer in the southern tongue, and may you fall ever upon the eyes of my foes. On impulse, he slashed at the air with the sword Gorthauer, and a voice sang in the darkness, high, exultant, clearer than of old. It spoke words to him that fired his blood, made him forget a moment wetness and chill and the weary walk that lay between him and the bed he yearned to collapse on. A dark road lies ahead, he breathed, but at least I have won back one true companion on it. I wonder what others I may find.